After the Civil War, Houston's black population grew rapidly, and by 1910, 1 in 3 Houstonians was African American. The transition from slavery to freedom, however, remained difficult in the Jim Crow South, including Houston. When the United States ended the Great War in 1917, the government sought locations to train American troops. Houston's Chamber of Commerce lobbied for one of the forts, which was expected to bring in $60,000 a week to the local economy. The city assured the Army that racial violence would not be an issue and that African American troops sent to guard the construction would be well received. After awarding Camp Logan to Houston, the Army sent 7 white officers and over 600 black soldiers who had been serving under General Blackjack Pershing with the 3rd Battalion of the 24th Infantry. Rather than being welcomed in town, the troops faced police harassment and racial discrimination by businesses and on streetcars. Their Army uniforms and service to their country offered no protection against an onslaught of racial slurs for stepping out of their place. Resentment over this mistreatment reached a boiling point on August 23, 1917. 2 policemen, Lee Sparks and Rufus Daniels, beat and arrested Private Alonzo Edwards when he came to the defense of a woman in her undergarments that the officers had pulled from her 4th Ward home and accused of hiding a gambler. Later, when Corporal Charles Baltimore came to inquire about Private Edwards, the officers beat him as well and then shot at him as he fled. Rumors spread like wildfire at the camp about the beatings and possible murder of Baltimore. Word also spread that an armed white mob was headed toward the camp. Understandably, this news sparked fear among the soldiers. Lynchings were common in the era and drew large crowds of spectators. Plus, early in the summer, a violent race riot erupted in East St. Louis, Illinois, where white mobs advanced on blacks, stabbing, clubbing, and hanging them indiscriminately, killing hundreds. In addition, Camp Logan's African-American troops were defenseless. Colonel William Newman, the white battalion commander, had locked up their sidearms at the request of the Houston police chief to prevent whites seeing the black soldiers as a threat. After hearing someone shout, "The mob is coming!" more than 100 soldiers from the 24th Infantry retrieved their weapons and advanced toward town. First Sergeant Vida Henry tried to dissuade the men but then joined them, possibly as the leader. As they advanced toward the police station, the soldiers killed 15 whites, including Officer Daniels and 3 other policemen. After 2 hours, the march disbanded and some of the soldiers slipped back into camp. 4 soldiers died, including Henry. The next day, martial law was in force, and the battalion was sent to New Mexico, where 118 of the men were arrested and charged with murder and mutiny and held for trial by General Court-Martial. No white civilians were brought to trial. The African-American soldiers were tried in 3 groups at Fort Sam Houston, where Gift Chapel was converted to a courtroom. The first group of 63 was tried in November in what was considered the largest murder trial in history. They were represented by Major Harry Greer, who had experience with court-martial proceedings but was not an attorney. Despite his arguments on their behalf, 13 men received death sentences and 41 were sentenced to life in prison. 4 others received shorter prison sentences and 5 were acquitted. When the condemned men were informed of their fate, they requested execution by firing squad, a soldier's death. Instead, they were hung on hastily built gallows 2 days later. This left no time for the Judge Advocate General to review the records, or for the soldiers to request clemency or to notify their families. The 2 other trials resulted in 15 more death sentences, but an outcry over the early hangings caused President Woodrow Wilson to commute 10 of them to life in prison. Most importantly, the trials following the Camp Logan Rebellion led to a change in military law. General Orders No. 7, issued in January 1918, prohibited carrying out a death sentence without a review and determination of legality by the Judge Advocate General, creating the first appellate structure for the U.S. Army. Controversy continues to swirl over the events, particularly the role of Sergeant Vida Henry. A career soldier, he served admirably around the world for 13 years and re-enlisted 3 times before his death. Some reports indicate he committed suicide after he realized the rebellion had failed. However, his death certificate and inquest clearly note that his death was a homicide. Interpretation of the evidence is shifting to show that, rather than leading a mutiny, Henry was acting in self-defense with his fellow soldiers. A second soldier killed during the rebellion, Private Brian Watson, was also a homicide and is suspected to have died from friendly fire. These two men are buried in unmarked graves at historic College Memorial Park Cemetery in Houston. Houston Community College professor Angela Holder, whose great-uncle Jesse Moore was one of the men executed after the first trial, explains.
I work with the College Memorial Park Cemetery Restoration Project, and so we marked off the area based on the cemetery layout. We've identified the place where there are two unknowns buried side by side. And I said, those are my guys. But we don't know who's in the grave that would have been on the left, who's on the right. We don't know. But we do have permission to put markers up for them from the cemetery. And that's important.
Once the African-American troops departed Houston, groups of white citizens established soldiers' clubs at Camp Logan. They visited the camp arriving by cars and trolley to bring a touch of home to the troops training there. Although a veil of silence surrounded this piece of Houston history, those who remembered living through it worked to ensure Houston did not experience a race riot during the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s. Today, a historical marker stands in Memorial Park on the site of the camp, making passing mention of the rebellion. For the family members like Angela Holder who still contemplate the injustice that their loved ones endured, and for the families, black and white, who senselessly lost relatives as a result of this incident, the hurt remains very real.